Hi, I'm Jerry Ventura. I work in circulation services, and I'm here to introduce Eric Tinglestadt. He's the Director of Workforce Development Services on campus, which consists of campus programs and services committed to student success and workforce preparation. Basically, they facilitate the transition from student to worker. Eric recently earned his educational doctorate in educational leadership and policy study. He's going to talk to you about resumes and cover letters today. Please welcome Eric Tinglestadt.
Thanks, Jerry. That was the nicest introduction I've ever had in my entire life, and might be of all time. We never know. Thank you for letting me come and talk to you this morning about resumes and cover letters. As she said, I work for the college in workforce development services. I've probably spent a good chunk of the last 12 years doing HR work, student employment, career development, and although I wouldn't have guessed it when I was little, I never would have thought I've spent this much time looking and talking about resumes to the point that I have in my life. So anyway, we're just going to spend about 50 minutes on it today. You're going to be conducting a search pretty soon for, is it internships or work? What part are you at in your program? How far along are you? Or are you all in the same boat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just starting.
Oh, just starting? Okay.
Last quarter.
Okay, great. Well, anytime I start off a presentation with resumes as the topic, I like to get a couple points out of the way. The first one is the purpose of a resume, because a lot of people think that that a resume itself is going to get them a job offer. They'll come to me and they'll bring me their resume and they say, you know, I think my resume needs to be redone. I'm not getting any job offers. The real purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. So a good way to gauge whether your resume is effective or not is, are you going out, are you sending it out, and are you getting interviews based on that? If you are, you know, your resume is getting you that chance to sit down face-to-face with an employer, then I would say the resume is probably doing its job. Doesn't mean you can't tweak it or make some edits to it, but for the most part, I think it's doing what it needs to do. If you're going out on interviews and you're not getting job offers, what we probably want to look at then is your interview technique. Is there something we can do in the interview to sell yourself better in person? And that's where mock interviews, role-playing, that kind of stuff comes into play. Okay? So is your resume getting you interviews? Second, there is no such thing as a perfect resume, despite the fact that there are so many books out there that say the perfect resume on them. The reason I say there's no such thing as the perfect resume is that ultimately your resume is going to be looked at by a person, myself, somebody in hiring authorities, student employment, or human resources. And for the most part, although I think people can agree on what makes up a good resume, there's still always going to be that 10% that really comes down to personal choice. There's a lot of people on campus that can give you help with your resume, your faculty, our office, the co-op office, women's programs. And if you put us all together and try to get us to come up with the perfect resume, we would probably agree on maybe 90%. But there's still that little faction of things that come up where one person might like something and thinks it looks good, but somebody else doesn't. So ultimately, you need to get your resume to the point where it's selling you well, it's selling you when you're not there to sell yourself in person, and that you're comfortable with it and it's speaking well about your experience in education. Last point, always consider your audience. This kind of ties into why there's no such thing as a perfect resume, because different fields have certain expectations about resumes and how they should look. For the most part, when I talk about resumes, I advise people to go with very conservative paper color. Don't get crazy with little icons or graphics on your resume. Don't get too cutesy. But if you're going into a field like marketing or elementary education, that's considered more acceptable, something a very creative field. The other rule you've probably heard is keeping your resume to one page. It's another good rule to follow, but you know, for someone like myself who works in higher education, if I sent in a one-page resume, I probably wouldn't make the initial cut. My resume right now is 4 to 5 pages. So it depends on the field, and you need to kind of do some investigation, and this is where your faculty can help out as to what is the hiring process typically like. And for your case, it would be in libraries. Is it going to be reviewed by one person? Is it going to be reviewed by a committee over a couple months? In which case, you usually you can make your resume a little bit longer because you know it's going to be read. So you need to do some investigation as to the types of jobs you're applying for and what's their hiring process like. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple different resume formats. The first one being chronological. If you open the resume booklet that we passed out, it's got the green cover on it. Okay. And if you turn to page 6, you're going to see an example of a chronological resume. Chronological resume is the most common and straightforward. Lists education and experience in reverse chronological order. That's how they came up with the name for it. It's a format that works really well if you've been in the same field for a while and moved your way up, or if you have consistent work experience with no gaps in your resume. A resume like this doesn't work too well for somebody who's been out of the job market for a while. Maybe you've been a stay-at-home mom. If you've had gaps in your employment history, because it's so focused on your employment timeline, if you've had those kind of gaps or spells where you haven't been working, employers like to call those red flags when they're looking at an employer at a resume. And if you're not there to explain what those gaps are for, it's just one of those things where an employer is thinking, what was going on there? Were they let go? Why weren't they working? So if you've got those kind of gaps in your employment history, maybe a chronological resume is not the best one for you. But if you've been in the same industry, if you've been moving up, chronological resumes, they show progression really well. This might be a good one to use. Format preferred by employers. Why? It's probably the easiest format for them to very quickly pick up and within 15 seconds get a very quick sense of who you are, what you've done, where you've been, and they can see that timeline, they can check for any gaps. So most employers that I talk to, they do prefer this format just because it's very easy for them to get a sense of who you are and where you've been. Now, if this format doesn't sell you well, though, I would still recommend that you go with another format instead of the chronological. And that is the one drawback there, the focus on the timeline. Another style is going to be the functional resume. And you can see an example of this on page 7. What we're doing here, this one works really well for people who've again, been out of the job market for a while. Maybe they've worked in good positions, but they've been in very different kinds of fields. The opportunities aren't related too well. I'll see this a lot for somebody who maybe has spent their career in construction or something totally unrelated, but they're going back to school for a degree as a paralegal, and their work history is very jumbled. What you do with a functional resume is you look at all your experience from every job, whether it's an internship, a volunteer work, past paid experiences, and you break that experience into 3 categories that you think the employer who you're applying to is going to be most interested. And you come up with 3 section headings that really kind of mirror the job opening that you're applying for. So if you look at the example on page 7, this person's applying for a paralegal office manager. They came up with 3 titles: litigation paralegal, office management, customer service. And then they break out their experiences underneath those 3 section headings. Okay? Doesn't say whether it was done at a past job. It doesn't say whether it was done at a volunteer experience or an internship. It just lets the employer know that, yes, I have experience doing these different responsibilities. Okay? And what you do then with the employment history is at the very bottom of the resume, you condense it into a very short little timeline. It says the name of the company, where you worked. You don't necessarily have to put the dates on there, but you can. It's up to you. But you're really trying to get the employer's eyes away from job titles and dates and get them more focused on your past experience. So that's the functional format. Okay? Does anybody have questions on those 2? Yeah.
Education.
Mm-hmm.
Would you put some college experience, even if you don't have a degree, would you want to list your college that you went?
Absolutely. Okay, so you're asking, I haven't graduated yet, can I still put my education down there?
Yes.
Absolutely. And what you would put is, how far along did you say you were?
I have 2 more quarters before I get my
Okay. So I would list it out just as if you had graduated. I would list the name of the degree you're pursuing, the name of the college, the city, the state, and then what I would...
Colleges though?
2 different colleges?
Like 3 that I have.
Did you earn degrees from the others?
No, it's
Okay.
all going to consolidate into one to get my AA.
Okay. I would focus on the place you're most recently attending, the one that you're going to be earning the degree from, and then at the bottom I would say anticipated graduation August 2007,
Okay.
if that's where you're at. Mhm. If it's more than 2 quarters out, I might say something like currently enrolled.
Winter.
Okay.
If I go fall and winter, probably skip summer.
Then what I would probably say is currently enrolled, 2 quarters remaining. Just something to let the employer know, yeah, I'm in the program, I'm studying library tech. Here's how far I am. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Now there is a third kind that basically is just a blend of the two. Would be referred to as a combination or a targeted resume. People, this is tending to become a little bit more popular. Basically what you're doing is you're really customizing the resume itself for each particular job opening you're going to. So this is the one that you're really getting in there in Microsoft Word and editing it each time you see a job that you're really excited about. One of the things that makes a combination targeted resume a little more different is that you've got this something that's usually called a summary of qualifications at the very top. You can see an example of this on page 8. And the summary of qualifications just very nicely boils down those key selling points that you want to get across to the employer. Maybe it's a catchphrase like 6 years customer service experience. Maybe you've had customer service experience in a variety of different capacities, but you want to boil it down because that's a key part of the job and let the employer know that you have 6 years total. Or maybe there are some personal characteristics that the job is really dependent on. If you were going into a sales position and you know they really want a very outgoing, people-oriented person, this might be a place where you could say something about your soft skills related to sales and working with other people. Okay. So that's a summary of qualifications. The rest, as you can see, it's just very much a blend of the chronological and the functional. They've got some skill categories. They've got their employment history down there in the bottom. But it's pretty much just a blend of the two with that summary of qualifications up near the top. Now, electronic resumes. I don't talk a lot about this, but what I will say is, for the most part, has anybody applied for a job online recently? How the HR departments have basically developed this application process is if you're applying online, they'll have sections where you can, you'll go to a web page and you'll be cutting and pasting chunks of your resume into an open field. Or maybe they'll just give you space to cut and paste the entire resume into a field and just have you fill out some contact information. What you want to do in that case is you'll still have your resume, your normal resume that you would send out. It's nicely formatted, it's got bullets, you've used italics and it made it look nice and pretty. But then you want to have this electronic version that's just type with no formatting, okay? No bullets, no bold, don't worry about centering, everything's left justified. Something that you can just very easily cut and paste into an online application and you don't need to worry about the formatting getting screwed up. Because that's, if you've got a lot of fancy formatting, you cut and paste into an online application, very likely the formatting is not going to come through and your resume, if they decided to print a copy, is going to have all this gobbledygook amidst the text, and it just makes it harder to read. If you're applying to large organizations, they're the ones that tend to use this because they get a lot of applications and it's very easy for them to keep all their resumes in a database. They have a job opening. They can have the computer scan those resumes in the database for keywords, and then the resumes that have the most hits or matches with the keywords, they pull those out into the pile to be called in for interviews later on. So if you're applying online, it's one reason to be very strategic about looking at the job announcement. What are the keywords? And am I putting my keywords back in my resume? Because that's how they're going to do their search. So just a little trick on electronic resumes. For the most part, if you're going to be sending a resume just electronically, an employer says, hey, can you send me your resume? Just make sure you send it as a Microsoft Word attachment. and don't cut and paste your resume into the body of the email. Send it as a separate attachment, and make sure you put your name on it, because a lot of times employers get so many emails, junk emails in particular. If they don't have something that says Mark Johnson resume, or your name and the position that you're applying for and the tagline, they might end up deleting it if they don't recognize it. I've had students send me resumes before and they didn't put any kind of a subject. I don't recognize the name it's coming from, and I just put that in my little delete box, because I don't know who it is that's sending it to me or what it's for. So make sure you identify your name and resume in the tagline or the subject line so they know it's coming. Okay, let's talk about templates for a second. Now, how many of you have actually created a resume before? Just 2 of you. 3. How many of you are comfortable using Microsoft Word? Okay. Sometimes I will work with people that aren't that comfortable with the formatting that you would do on a resume in Microsoft Word, and they ask about templates. Has anybody ever found the templates that you can use in Microsoft Word for resumes? Okay. My advice on templates, should I use one? Generally, no. And here's why. I think you want to make your resume a good representation of you, something that's unique, that's going to stand out, that's not going to look generic. For people that look at resumes all the time, HR officers or anybody who's doing hiring, the resume templates really stand out. That's one thing. If you gave me a stack of 100 resumes and asked me to find the 3 Microsoft templates, I could probably do it in about 2 minutes. They just have such a particular look to them. You just know which ones they are automatically. The other reason I would say not to use them is because they lock you into a particular format. And as you grow and evolve over time as an employee, you develop new skills, more education, you want to make changes to it, they really lock you into an exact format. And if you want to move things around, oftentimes they won't let you. So they can be very rigid, and then you have to start all over again. Whereas if you're in a Microsoft Word document, changes are much easier. So that's my other knock against templates. The only template program I've ever come across that I really like, and we do have it up in the Student Employment Center, is something called Winway Resume. We've got the latest version, 10.0. And why I like this, for 2 reasons. One, it allows you to make any kind of change you could want to change. If you want to move sections around, if you want to use different fonts, formats, it gives you great flexibility to make changes to it. The other is that if you want to save it when you leave as a Microsoft Word document, you can convert it to a Microsoft Word document, and then you go home and you can make changes to it there as well. You don't need to have Winway Resume on your home computer or anywhere else to make changes. So that's the other reason I like it. If you're locked into a particular template brand like Microsoft Word and you go somewhere else and it's Microsoft Works, unless they've got a converter, you're stuck. So that's another reason why Winway works pretty well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what you want to include on your resume. Contact information. Very obvious. First thing you want to have on your resume, it's at the top of the page. So what's your contact information going to include? Well, it's going to include your name, of course. And I usually recommend that you make your name bigger than the rest of the font on your resume, maybe 16, 18 point. Just makes your name stand out a little bit more, helps the reader's eyes gravitate to the top of the page. You want to include your mailing address, of course. Now, contact numbers. My advice is that you just go with 1 number. Sometimes I have students bring me a resume that has their work phone number, their home phone number, their cell phone number, and their pager number. If you are trying to keep your resume to 1 page, that's really not a lot of space. So to waste space with a lot of contact information is not your best bet. So 1 phone number, whatever's got a consistent, reliable answering machine on it. Email. What do you think about email on a resume? Yeah, it's a good thing to include these days because employers are using it a lot more to contact applicants to set up interview dates, send supplemental information, so I think it's a good thing to include. Does everybody in here have an email address? Anybody have an address that's kind of funny? You're chuckling. What's your email address? Angel's Hair 62? Mm-hmm. And what was yours? What is it? Okay. I've had students bring me resumes where it says crazy girl at Hotmail, whatever. Just fun things that you would use with your friends. It's great. If you're doing it in a job search and you're going to put something on your resume, of course you want it to be professional. So if you have an email address that doesn't sound very professional, you might want to, for the duration of your job search, create a free email account somewhere, Yahoo or Hotmail, and just put your first name dot last name at whatever. Just for the job search, and then make sure you're, of course, checking it, just to make it look more professional. Any questions on contact information, what you'd want to put on there? Okay. Objective statement. You'll notice that I've got the word optional after objective statement. Remember when I was talking about that perfect resume and how there are going to be some things that people disagree about what works and what doesn't? Objective statement is one of those. For me, I think objective statements, to be honest, are a waste of space. Hopefully when you're submitting an application, you're turning in your resume somewhere, you're also going to be submitting a cover letter. And in the very first paragraph of that cover letter, you're saying what position you're applying for, where you heard about it, and why you're interested in it. Basically the same thing as your objective statement. So if you're going to submit a cover letter, which is what I would recommend, then an objective statement really becomes a waste of space. Plus, I think it's easy to screw up an objective statement really easily. A lot of times I'll see objective statements that are just really general and don't say anything, or sometimes they list multiple objectives. Maybe they're looking for a part-time job or a volunteer spot, or they're just looking for anything. A lot of times I'll see students say in their objective statements how they are hoping this job will further their career and give them the experience they're looking for, which is great. But at the application part of the process, the employer is really more interested in what you can do for them as opposed to what they can do for you. So my advice is to really on your resume focus on your experience, your education, and how that relates to the job that you're applying for. I would take that type of language you'd use in your objective statement and maybe use that in the introductory paragraph of your cover letter. Okay? And if you look on the examples on page 6 and 7, actually 6 and just page 6, the only objective statement we have in here, sales associate position with Renton Honda that will capitalize on my business education, winning people skills, proven sales experience. That's probably about as good as you can get for an objective statement. The position you're applying for, the company you're applying for, so you're customizing it for that employer. And then what are you bringing to the table? Questions on objective statement? Okay.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
If you do include one, is it good to write one that is specific to that company, like this is the
Yeah, yeah. Employers, I mean, it really does, they're looking for something that's going to stand out, something that lets them know that you as an applicant are very interested in coming to work for them. So if you can slip the employer's name in the objective statement or use it in the cover letter, especially that first paragraph and last paragraph, that just lets the employer know this isn't a form letter. They took the time to draft this and send it to us. They're thinking about our position. It just helps your resume and application stand out a little bit more. Education, where do you think that belongs on your resume? At the top, at the bottom, somewhere in the middle?
I would think that you would decide which one is more relevant to the position between education and experience, and put the more relevant.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, you really want to be looking at the job announcement and try and get a sense of what is the employer looking for. So you're taking a look at the qualifications, what they're asking for in terms of past experience, education. If they're asking for a specific degree and you have that education, great, go ahead and put education up near the top. It just lets them know that that's one qualification down, you've met it. If they're not asking for specific education, but they're asking for all these past experiences and you've got experience that mirrors it, then I would put the experience up near the top. Believe it or not, they do studies on resumes and how people look at them. Most resumes get, in an initial look, 10 to 15 seconds, which is not a lot of time to communicate a page worth of information. And what employers typically notice more than anything else is the top half of the resume as opposed to the bottom half. So you want to get your most relevant experience up near the top in that area that they're going to notice. So if your education is what is going to jump out most to them, put that up near the top. If it's your experience, go ahead and lead with that, and then move the education down. Now, what you want to say with your education, I think the example on page 6 is a nice way to go ahead and state it. You want to make sure that you spell out the degree that you've earned. So is it a bachelor's, an associate? And then what is the focus? Is it library tech, or is it a general AA degree? The name of the college. And make sure you include the city-state, because especially if you're going to a college like Highline, a lot of people outside the immediate area, when they hear the word Highline Community College, they might not know where that is. They might not even know if it's a state college, because it doesn't really say a geographic area to it. It's not like Seattle Central Community College or Edmonds Community College. So Highline Community College, Des Moines, Washington. And then when you graduated or when you're anticipating to graduate. Now on the example on page 6, it's got a GPA on there. How do you guys feel about GPA? When do you think it belongs? Depends on how good it is. General rule is if your GPA is a 3.5 or higher, go ahead and put it on your resume. I've talked to HR recruiters who said, you know, if you're a really involved student, if you're working in student government, or if you're holding down a part or a full-time job while you're going to campus, you're involved in student clubs, and you've got a GPA that's like a 3.3 or a 3.4, that's still good. We still want to hear that because that demonstrates to us balance, that you can multitask and carry on a number of different responsibilities at once and still succeed academically. So general 3.5, you can go a little bit lower than that if you're a very involved student or holding down a part-time job somewhere. The example on page 6 also has related coursework. You'll typically see that used by somebody who's maybe just coming out of a program, doesn't have a lot of work experience yet, but they just want to make sure that it's spelled out for the employer that here are some of the classes I've taken that relate to the job that I'm applying for. And you know, if you don't have a lot of work experience and you're having trouble filling one page, it can be used as a filler, just to kind of flesh out and detail your educational experience a bit more. Experience, employment history, I'm going to talk about that in more detail. We're going to skip it for now. Statement of references, I've got that one down as optional. Most people will say, you know, at the very bottom of your resume, you can make a statement that says something like, references available upon request. Personally, I like that. It just lets me know I'm at the end of the resume. There is no page 2 I have to hunt for. It's kind of like the period at the end of a sentence. Other people will tell you, you know what, they know they can ask for your references. You probably included it on the application. It's a waste of space. You could probably put more important things on there. This is one of those judgment calls you need to figure out for yourself. Okay? One thing I would recommend that you do is that whoever you use for references, and it should be somebody professional, past coworker, past student, maybe you've done projects with, faculty, supervisors, somebody who can speak to your ability to show up on time, do good work, get along with other people. Whoever you're going to use, make sure that they know that you're using them for a reference. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls out of the blue from a past person I've worked with. They want to do a quick reference check right on the spot. I haven't talked to the person in a couple years. They're applying for a job that's very different from the capacity I worked with them in. I could probably do a lot better job selling them if that person had contacted me and said, hey, I just interviewed at this company. I listed you as a reference. They're probably going to be contacting you. Could you please highlight my ability to do this? They seemed really interested in it. Then I would be able to do that person a lot better justice and sell them to that employer if you give them the heads up. So make sure you're letting them know you're applying for a job, you're going to use them as a reference, here's what you'd like them to say or highlight. Other possible headings you might want to use. Accomplishments. Some people have a section that says accomplishments up at the top, and you just list out some work or scholastic achievements that you want to make sure the employer knows. Additional education, training, and seminars. Has anybody been in a job before where you have periodic in-services on customer service, diversity, things like that? Okay. If you have been, a lot of times people will create a section like this right underneath education that says additional education, training, and seminars. Maybe this is where you list out some certifications, some of those workshop topics that you've been to. It's just a way to let an employer know that you've been continuing your education. Summary of qualifications we talked about, relevant coursework we talked about, languages. Anybody in here bilingual? Okay. Even if the job's not asking for it, if it's not required, it's a good thing to put this on your resume as a separate heading. There's so many languages being spoken in the Puget Sound right now. Even if it's not something the employer is making a key requirement, there are so many out there that are thinking to themselves, you know, it would be nice if we had somebody on our staff that spoke this, because a large part of our customer service base speaks this language. It would just be helpful. One more little plug in your favor. So I would put it on there and just say languages fluent in both English and whatever else language you speak. Computer technical skills. If you're applying for a job that is looking for certain computer skills, you could use that as a separate section. Publications, if you've ever gotten anything published. Honors, awards, recognition, activities. Professional associations. Hobbies and interests. I have an asterisk by that one. What do you think? Belong on your resume? If that's the only catch. If there's some way you can make a hobby or one of your interests relevant to the job you're applying for, go ahead and put it on there. But for the most part, what I usually see students put down is, I like to go running, reading, movies. I really like Disney movies. That's just a waste of space. I've seen one person use this effectively in that they were part of in their spare time, they were part of a singing group that would go around and do tours, and she was chair of the group, so she would make all the reservations, travel plans. She was applying for a job where that would come in handy, so she put that on there. Oh, that's kind of an interesting story she could tell and how she uses those skills in her social life as well. So if you can make the case for it being relative, okay, but if not, go ahead and take it off. Okay, carefully review the job announcement. I passed around a white sheet of paper, a job announcement from Timberland Regional Library. We got this one in our office last week. It's a part-time position, 20 hours a week, library associate. So you've got the description, qualifications, application procedure. Okay, anytime you get a job announcement, you're going to submit an application. My first advice is to take the announcement, grab a highlighter, and just go through it and highlight the keywords or phrases. Remember when I talked about the electronic resume and how they can scan the resumes in the database for keywords? The human eye does the same thing. If you've put together a job announcement and you've got those keywords, the type of person you're looking for in your head, when people are scanning the resumes, the same things are going to, their brain is going to work the same way that computer does. They're going to see keywords, it's going to resonate with them, they're going to think, okay, this person's fitting the bill for what we're looking for. So look for the keywords they use in their job announcement and try and reflect that language back into your resume as best you can. Okay. When you're writing out your experience, write in statements, not sentences and paragraphs. If you look on page 6 and 7 and on page 8, under the experience, they're not writing in sentences, they're writing in statements. Each one starts with a power adverb, so supervised, expanded, handled, reduced, monitored, drafted, summarized, prepared, created. Powerful adverbs that really let the employer know what they've been doing. You can get a list of those power adverbs on page 10. Another advice on writing out experience is holding on to your old job descriptions. Most times people get a job description for their place of business, and what do you do with it? It usually goes in a drawer and you never look at it again. My advice is to take your job descriptions and just drop them in a file that you might keep with your resumes or other things. And that way, when it comes time to look back at a job you've done 3, 4, 5, 7 years ago, you've got all of your responsibilities laid out in that statement power adverb form, and at least it's a starting point where you can start to do some cutting and pasting, and then maybe you quantify the terms a little bit later, but at least you don't have to rack your brains and think, okay, what was I doing in that position for this company in '97? And last, be specific and quantify. You want to make your resume stand out. You want the employer to get a good visual for what your experience has been. If you can make statements that really paint a vivid picture, it'll help the employer to know what it is you've been doing. Hard skills versus soft skills really quick. Hard skills are specific quantifiable things that you've done on past jobs. 12 months retail experience, opening and closing procedures, overseeing multiple cashier stations, preparing staff schedules, versus soft skills. And those are the characteristics. Outgoing, customer-oriented, professional appearance, detail-oriented, punctual. What do you think the employer is more concerned about? Actually, the employer is probably going to be more concerned with experience, because this is something you've actually done, okay? So they can do via reference checks. In the interview, they can more geared questions around specific things that you've done that you're bringing to the new job. The problem with soft skills, not that they're not important to a job, but even the shyest person in the world on their resume could say, I'm really outgoing. You can't really back it up. Whereas if you've been in a sales job for 10 years successfully, you can't fake those kind of people. So you really, it demonstrates that, you know what, this person's probably really got the people skills we're looking for. They've been doing it for 10 years, as opposed to just saying they're very outgoing. So for the most part, you want to focus your resume on hard skills. The only time you would probably use soft skills would be in like a summary of qualifications. If the employer is saying they're looking for a certain type of person with certain characteristics and you match that, that would be the time you'd want to use soft skills. But for the most part, stick with the hard skills on your resume. Things you don't want to put on your resume, real quickly. You don't want to state reasons for leaving previous employers, not a confession. No matter how bad a situation you left, your boss was a jerk, whatever, you want to make sure you don't reference that on your resume. Might come up in the interview, why did you leave your past employer? Just don't make reference to it on your resume, because I have seen students do it before, and it's unnecessary, it raises red flags and concerns, so don't address it. You don't want to include salary information or the date that you're available for work, not on your resume. Sometimes you might, in a job announcement, see a request that says they're looking for somebody immediately. Maybe in your cover letter you could state that, but not on the resume. Don't include personal information, so race, religion, age, marital status, children. And for the most part, I don't see this anymore on the resumes that students bring me. I think the word's out there that you wouldn't include this on your resume. Where do you think people get tripped up on this, though? What's that first question you usually get in an interview? Tell me about yourself. And I can't tell you how many times I've done practice interviews with students and I've sat down and said, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, I've been married for 5 years. I attend something Presbyterian church. I've got 2 great kids, my dog Spot, and they just launch. It's a very disarming question, and people just launch into what's easiest for them to answer, and they start talking about their personal life. It's illegal information for employers to ask about. You don't want to open a can of worms in a resume, or in an interview. So during an interview, when they ask you that question, tell me a little bit about yourself. You want to have a nice, polished answer, 20 seconds long, that talks about your education experience very succinctly and how it relates to the job you're applying for. Okay? You don't want to repeat yourself. A lot of times people have had jobs that are similar to each other, and I'll look in their resume and they'll say they did the same responsibility in separate jobs. As long as the employer sees it once, that's fine. Again, if you're trying to keep your resume to 1 page, even 2 pages, you need to be concise. So if you can avoid repeating yourself, that's great. You want to also avoid abbreviations because the person who's reading it might not know what the abbreviation you're writing about stands for. The exception to that would typically be regarding your education. Most people are going to know the difference between an AA, a BA, a master's degree. Other thing, resume. You don't want to list your references. Sometimes people will take up the whole bottom half or third of their resume with their references, the contact information, all that. References should really go on a separate sheet of paper. It says references up at the top, and then you list out 3 to 5 people, their name, their position title, what was your relationship to them, so past coworker, past supervisor, and then their contact information. Okay? Design tips. We talk about resumes being a personal marketing tool, so we want to make sure it's an attractive document, something that's easy on the eyes. Some general rules to follow: 1-inch margins all the way around. I can't tell you how many times I've seen 1 inch on the top, 1 inch on the left, 1/2 inch on the right, and then 3 inches on the bottom. And so it's not centered, it looks funny. 1-inch margins all the way around. Single space within a section, double space between sections. So it just helps the reader's eyes jump from education to experience to languages. Microsoft Word, you can do lots of great formatting tricks: bold, italicize, crazy fonts, which is great. You can really use that to your advantage if you want to draw the reader's eyes to something in particular. But if you get too carried away, it takes away from the whole purpose. It's too much for the eyes to focus on. They can't zero in on it. A lot of times you'll just see section heads in all capitals and bold. So education, experience, all capitals and bold. It just helps the reader's eyes go down the page. I've seen resumes before where everything is in bold. I asked the student, why did you do that? And the response was, well, I thought it'll look cool. Well, it looks cool, but you're missing the opportunity to help the eyes of the reader go from place to place. 1 page is ideal. And for the most part, if you're just coming out of a college program, you don't have a lot of work experience, I would say keep it to 1 page. If you're going over to a 2nd page, you're probably putting unnecessary things on there. You could work with somebody in my office or myself, try and whittle it down to 1 page. But nowadays, if you've got significant work experience, if you've got a degree, you've got some education, it's much more common to go to a 2nd page. And I would say only go to a 2nd page if you can fill up at least half of that 2nd page. Don't go to a 2nd page if it's just 3 lines. Find some way to pare it down a couple lines and get it back to 1 page. Make sure you're using quality paper. So you go to Kinko's, you say, I've got my resume, I want to get it copied onto some good resume paper. They've got that little swatch book there at the front. Resume paper should be a little heavier, bond quality. And my advice is to stick with light colors like white, ivory, light gray. Avoid the colors we used to use in the 80s, blue and pink and some of the funnier ones. Today it's more conservative. And then use a laser printer. Inkjets, if you get it smudged, if you're walking it out to your car and it's misty out and it gets water on it, inkjets will run. Laser jets don't. So if you can get it laser printed, that's great. Most important point, proofread. If you submit a resume that's got typos, grammatical errors, what's the message that you're sending to employers? The message would be, I don't pay attention to detail and my work is rushed, and this is what I'm going to bring to you as an employee. So make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to really read through your resume to avoid mistakes, very easy mistakes that are going to send a message about you, okay? And I think, honestly, one of the reasons why people make so many mistakes on their resumes is because, anybody in here like to procrastinate? I procrastinate. Applications have due dates. It's due by 5 o'clock on Friday. So what do? You put it off until Thursday, Friday. You're rushing to get it together. You don't leave yourself time to have somebody else proofread it for you. Spell check's not going to catch everything. And so you submit it, and then a week later when you look at it, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I made one of these mistakes. I saw one of these recently. Somebody had their employment dates. It was from 18-something to 19-something. It was funny. And you know, if you've been staring at the same page, the same piece of paper for a day or a day and a half, your brain just becomes oblivious to some of those things. You read through it so quickly. Somebody told me the trick, if you don't have time to have somebody else read it, you can always read it yourself, going from right to left up the page. It just forces your eyes to look at it differently, and you're more likely to catch spelling mistakes that way. Where do you go with help, or where do you go for help? Student Employment Center up in upper lobby of Building 6, right off the east parking lot. We will take a look at your resume. I have students email me their resumes all the time. We've got Winway resume software. We've got computers available for you to use. They have Microsoft Word and Winway. Staff to give you feedback. If you like playing around online, probably one of the best resources for resume help is the monster.com Resume Center. So if you like going to those places, you can check that one out. Now, we're getting short on time, and I wanted to talk about cover letters. So if you could do me a favor and just pass those around. In the green booklet I gave you, on the very last page, page 11, you'll see a sample of a cover letter. Now, the example on page 11 is just a very brief cover letter. If you're applying to a job and they just ask you for a resume and a cover letter or a brief resume, and honestly, even if they don't ask, if they just send me your resume, I usually do a very short cover letter just with it to introduce it. Keep your cover letter nice and short and to the point. If you're going to do a really short cover letter, my advice is to do just an introductory paragraph. In that introductory paragraph, you're stating what position you're applying for, how you heard about it, and maybe just a quick point about how enthusiastic you are about that job. And then in the middle, you could either bullet out or write in a paragraph a couple highlights about your education experience and how it relates to the job opening. And in that last paragraph, you restate your enthusiasm for the position and you ask for the interview. That's the action statement. My advice, and again, I think the more assertive job seekers are the ones that have more success. In that last paragraph, if you say something to the effect of, I'll contact your office within 1 week to make sure you got my application materials okay. It gives you an opportunity to call, maybe find out a little bit more about the position. It lets them know that you're interested in it without being overbearing. Don't call multiple times, just call the once. And it again, it reaffirms to the employer that you're really interested in this opportunity and you want to talk to them about it. As opposed to saying you can contact me at such number and you just end up waiting by the phone. Okay. The handout I just gave you, it says template for cover letters, walks you through the format of a standard 4-paragraph cover letter. From the very tip top, which would be your name and contact material, date, the employer's contact material, the body, and the closing. The 4 paragraphs typically work out to be the introductory paragraph, which we talked about. Second paragraph might talk about your experience or past experience. Third paragraph might talk about your education as it relates to the position opening. And then that 4th paragraph where you restate your enthusiasm for that particular position. That's where you say, once again, I'm really excited about this library associate position at Timberland Library Regional System, something like that. And then you ask for the interview, or you let them know you're going to contact them soon. And then you just close it with a sincerely, respectfully, you name it. Okay. Questions on the cover letter handout? Okay. Any questions in general? Like I said, I have students send me their resumes all the time, and I am more than happy to look at them and get back to you electronically. It's the easiest way for me to do it these days, just given my schedule. If you want to send me an email, I'm going to put my email address on the board here. It is going to be E for Eric, Tingels, etingles at highline.edu. And the only thing that I ask is that you give me at least 2 days lead time to get back to you. If you send it to me, I've had students send me resumes at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night and say, could you get back to me first thing Wednesday? And that's just not enough time for me to do it. You got to give me at least 2 days to take a look at it and give you some kind of insightful comment on what you can do. Okay? All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me come and speak to you today.